we got the Millant Books, which are said to be 3 volumes. They're actually 4 volumes. Has anyone read the first volume of the Millant, the history portion of it? Because it's really good. It's really worth reading. Sorry.
Yeah.
I really highly recommend at some point. There's about 50 pages of bow history, or with great, exciting titles like "The Conflict Regarding Musical Styles and Its Influence of French Violin Methods During the 18th Century," which is actually, you know, it sounds kind of dry, but it's actually really, really interesting about how what was in Tort's mind, what was going on in Paris at the time when Tort was making the modern bow. Also, much longer sections on the father and elder brother of Francois Xavier Tort. The role of Freemasonry, which I think is really fascinating in what's going on there in terms of secret societies or whatnot, but also we're pretty sure that Tort was a Mason, and how that sort of played into how you know, what his clientele was. I'm sure you can all relate. What your clientele is really relates to what sort of bow you're making. And this gives a glimpse into what's going on to the societies that Tort's having to deal with. And also, it's really cool. You get this history of his brother sided with the royalists in, say, right before the revolution. He bet on the wrong horse, whereas Francois Xavier sort of kept himself apolitical. He was able to keep going, whereas his brother had all the time, and he had to get divorced so that his wife wouldn't be subject to the purges and things. I find it really, really fascinating, and I think it, you know, imagine what's going on in our little problem of COVID. Imagine if you have a revolution going on in your country while you're trying to make a living, while you're trying to figure out who's your clientele and what's going on. I find those, I really think that first volume is worth a good read. It's really good bedtime reading because it does kind of put you to sleep. But another thing I want to talk about is that if you have any French at all, if you get to a part that's sticking or seems a little weird, if you can, or if you have German for that matter, if you can read the original French, the translation's quite good, but it's not perfect. Florian, how is the German translation?
I think it's good. My French is not good enough to really compare it one-to-one, but it's yeah, it's readable, it's understandable. So, but I don't know about fine details. So
yeah, one of the ones that sticks out. I was reading the entire books yesterday. In the vigneron section, there's this one quote about. In the English, it says, "Vigneron could make a bow a day. We know this from his nephew, who would tell anyone who would listen that he could do this." So what the actual thing is, you know, and I talked to Bernard Millant about this once. Yeah, the nephew. He would talk all the time. You know, but the actual French translation is not. It's not anyone who would listen. It's anyone who could hear. Which is kind of a subtle difference, but it's like even people who have no interest in bows would hear about this story or something, you know. And I was talking to my ex-wife who's French about this and trying to get a feel for. She said, "Well, it's just the idiom. We don't have the idiom." But I think it is actually a little bit different. All right, so I emailed yesterday a whole bunch of bows that I was interested in talking about to some extent. Were people able to kind of glance at that and think about it all? Kinda. Did any of those pop out as, wow, we really got to talk about that though? Or should we just go to volume 1 and start paging through? Yeah? Volume 1. I think the first one I had noted on there, you know, I just kind of immediately went to torch, which is what I do in any fallback situation. What I look at on page 161, there's bow 10. So for you guys who don't have the books, it's this bow up here. So what we're looking at are, that's if you look at the bows that are just on page 160, compared to the bow on page 161, like bow 8 is still kind of a pretty rustic bow. He's not quite figured out everything on bows. But then to me, by the time he gets to that bow there, the modern bow has been invented. And if you go back 2 or 3 pages, everything's a little, oh, here's one, there's no ebony in the head plate. There's no this, the frog looks, the throat looks a little thin and fragile. Vito, I really want to go see the lecture you gave. I thought that was a fantastic topic. I'm really looking forward to when that is available online, about all the compromises you have to make between strength and...
Yeah, it was an idea that just came to me because, Tony asked me to come up with a topic for discussion. I said, what could it be?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that a lot of makers don't do restoration. So I think this is a topic is still in development, and then there's a lot can be discussed about that still. I mean, it was a great discussion, but I think it can be continuously, talked about. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great resource for makers that dedicate 100% of their time to making, to understand where their bows end up,
Great. I will look forward to doing that. I mean, I do a fair bit of, I do maybe 15% rehairs and whatever, but it's great to get the input of people who are seeing them much more than I am. So
It was
I
a
really
nice
think
lively discussion, yeah. It was
I
good.
think that was a great topic idea. And so, but part of that is, as we look at that bow, if you look at the picture of looking down at the shell slide, how sort of thin those rails are. And I've had other bows from that era, and the actual ebony rails there measure in maybe 2.5, right? Which is getting pretty thin and pretty fragile. And how deep that throat is, that's thin, fragile. He doesn't have an underside. So, but I just really think it's a beautiful bow. There's a different era that I like a little better, but it's on this book. And I actually didn't pull out any other torque bows, I don't think. Ones that I really like are, if you get to bow 22, which is on page 168, I'm gonna hold that up for you guys. You can't see it. Yeah, nice violin bow. That's a cello bow with a violin style head. Those are really cool. I've seen a couple of them. And in particular, the bow, as the people who have the books, the bow on the left side, page number 22, the head's maybe a little more elegant on that one. I like the frog better on the bow on the right side of the page. One of the cool things you can see the bow on the right side of the page, you can see that the way he made the channel for the shell was he went all the way through and then plugged it with ebony where it wasn't going to be. Can you see that sort of, you can sort of see the seam where the ebony isn't glued as well. And there are a number of makers that I don't do expertise, who that's how they made their bows with even when they were putting a metal heel plate on there. And you can see the little triangles in there, even in the cello bows. Josh, are you able to think of any makers that did that? You see more bows than I do. Any come to mind? No.
Josh, you're muted.
Here we go.
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'd have to think about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have a quick question about that
yeah.
one. So that's the ebony piece that they fitted while they were carving the pearl slide. Is that right? They just fitted a piece of ebony in the back.
Yeah.
And does it kind of looks to me almost like there's like a strange ebony line between that and the pearl slide.
Oh, I
Is
see
that
what you're
true?
saying.
I
Yeah,
was just
isn't that
curious
cool?
what that was.
I've never noticed that, but yeah, I do think there is something there. Maybe, and as much as we want to think of these guys as gods, maybe he just had this piece of ebony and it wasn't quite long enough, so he shoved in another little one and glued it.
Oh, okay.
And it's quite possible. I kind of doubt that was a specific something that he wanted to do per se.
Okay.
So everything flows out of tort. Those are the only two bows that were in my brain to discuss. Are there any other tort bows that people want to bring up?
Looks like Ulf.
Oh,
You gonna unmute? Here we go.
okay. You need to unmute or okay, go. What bow is that?
Page 177, volume 1, and this bow, that's 35.
Uh-huh.
I really love this frog.
Mm-hmm.
It's so powerful.
Uh-huh.
Just what I wanted to add here. Anyone want more glance of it? I just feel very happy when I see this.
Yeah.
So, so one of my, I guess, along these lines, Matt, if I may, like, so Ulf feels like that frog just looks powerful, and I'm wondering why does that frog give that impression? Like if we could talk a little bit to that. I see it, but what is it? What is it about it that gives it that powerful? Why do we say that kind of characteristic?
So Ulf, talk about what in the bow is really exciting you. Tell us about that. I think it's a great bow as well in a lot of ways. Tell us about what you're liking about it. You can hold it down. The other people.
Yeah. I like it because it's a kind of high frog.
Mm-hmm.
And the powerful thumb grip is really, really thick in a way, and the opening is leaned back in a way, goes down in a nice curve. Not perfect, I should say, but it's really personal and gives a lot of happiness to me, as I say. Yeah, quite a lot of black on the side, not too big eye.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think also the frog is a little bit shorter, maybe 44.5, something like that.
Uh-huh.
So, well, this is a kind of a powerful expression in my experience of bows. So, okay.
A couple neat things on that bow. Do you notice that on the small heel plate, the petite talon, you can see that only has 2 pins and not 3?
Yeah.
So typically you'd be seeing 3 pins in the shape of a triangle on a tort in a situation like that. That one only has 2, and it's thought that the 3 pins were like this secret thing to other masons. I'm a mason, you should be buying from me because I'm one of you guys. Although he didn't want to come out and say he was a mason because politically, it's a little bit like if you, let's say, I don't want to mention names, but there's a shop owner in Raleigh, North Carolina that some people don't agree with his politics and way of expressing those, and so they don't go there. And in that same way, if you said I'm a mason, then you've got a number of people who aren't going to go working for you. But if you're subtly dog whistling, I got this triangle, I'm with you guys, people are going to do that. That one only has 2. That bow, I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in like an old VSA, Millant is talking about this bow. And he talks about, I got this bow, it's only got 2 pins. And my assistant said, you should put in a 3rd pin. So that's original. And he said, no, I'm not gonna do that. I know it's original. And he said, like 2 weeks later, this bow came in at Vatalo's shop. And Vatalo said, you guys see this bow? I don't understand it. He went over there and there was a bow with 2 pins as well in that area. So who knows, running short on silver wire that week? Yeah, who knows what's going on, because stuff like that happens. I'm sure that's happened to most of us. That's a cool thing about that. I need to call, can I make a sideline for about 5 minutes on frog composition?
Please.
Are people up for that? I need to call my IT assistant over. Paul? Aidez-moi, s'il te plaît. Uh-huh. So how am I going to get a drawing up here, Paul?
All right, that way.
I'm going to share screen.
Indeed you are. But the host will need to enable.
Okay, just a moment.
Okay. Paul, this is my assistant, Paul.
Howdy.
Reluctant rehairer. A reluctant ex-rehairer.
How do I enable sharing for him?
It'll be down in the settings for the whole call.
Who can share? All participants. Who can share?
Make it all. Doesn't matter. No one else.
Very good.
Paul is a French guy, or
What's that?
if Paul is a French guy, or
Paul's half French.
il connaît le français, ici le français?
Oh, yeah, moitié français.
Parfait, parfait.
Uh-huh. Paul, I want the next picture.
So you're now sharing your screen. You are like in your screen, and you can interact with your screen as you would normally.
So right now it's blank. Right now.
Okay, cool.
There we go.
All right. So, as we look at so in this drawing, you have I wanted to talk about the proportions of the ferrule to the thumb projection. And so I just sort of did a bunch of drawings this morning just to do, this one's defining the terms. We got the height of the ferrule, that's pretty obvious. The thickness of the thumb projection, and then the gap. By the gap, I mean like how far back is the thumb projection sitting compared to how far out the ferrule sticks. Does everyone understand what I'm trying to express there? The dimensions? So to me, is my cursor showing up for you guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any chance you could zoom, pinch zoom so the picture's a little bigger?
Hey, assistant. I don't know if I can or not, Josh. I'm going to try. Can
Okay,
you, do you think I can zoom here somehow, Paul?
No.
No. I'm sorry, Josh. We don't think we can.
Okay.
So, he's going to give it a go here.
No, we're good.
Yeah, we could if we had like 5 minutes, but we don't.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Just proceed. That's fine.
All right. So I'm talking about, so if you've got the height of your ferrule, let's just call it 5.5 for now. The proportion you want in this area, if you make it the exact same, to me that looks a little weak. If you make it about 1 millimeter extra, that might look okay. If you make it 1.5 millimeters, it looks okay. But the other thing that varies in that is the actual little gap that you have here. Do people understand what I mean by the setback gap?
Yes.
As that determines a lot. So here's 3 bows that I've drawn where the setback gap, the little bit here, is 1 millimeter. On this top one, the width of the thumb projection is the exact same as the height of the ferrule. And to me, that looks a little weak in this particular situation when the setback gap is only 1, that looks really weak. In this case, this is where the height of the thumb projection is the height of the frog plus about 0.5 millimeter or plus about 1 millimeter. To me, that looks about right. And here's one where this is where the height of this is 1.5 millimeters versus the ferrule. The ferrule's about 5.5. This is roughly at 7. To me, that looks really thick. I don't know if other people are feeling that way. And when your setback gap is only 1 millimeter, to me that is a good proportion. And now if your setback is more like 2 millimeters, here's the same sort of proportion thing going on there. For me, this top one, which is where the ferrule, this gap here is about like the ferrule, only plus 1 millimeter. To me, that looks a little weak. This is with 1.5 millimeters. I think I should get the original drawing. I'm not seeing it very well. I wish I could zoom in better. The middle one is 1.5. To me, that one looks really kind of nice. And then this is plus about 2 millimeters. To me, that looks a little thick. And if we go back to the bow that Ulf showed, to me, that thumb, in some ways, that thumb's a little thick. But the more I look at it, the more I think, cool, that is really kind of cool in a lot of ways. So one of the things to be thinking about when you're making a frog is this too thick? Is this too thin? Measuring's okay, but then again, you don't want to get bogged down in rules because there's always, in almost every language, there's the phrase, it's the exception that proves the rule. Florian, what's it in German?
Die Ausnahme bestätigt die Regel.
There you go. Eric,
Yeah.
in French, c'est l'exception qui prouve la règle.
Yeah.
Right? And it's fun. It's in other languages as well. But I agree with you, Ulf. I think that's a fantastic book. And that's a great one to have inspiration. Anyone else got bows to talk about in the tort section?
But am I mute? No, I'm live. Not necessarily specific to anyone in particular, but related to tort was this book from Paul Childs a few years ago, where I actually saw in Paul Seafried's shop, I saw the bow that he sent around the world and copied.
Yeah.
The thing that I find more fascinating than the actual pictures of torts and things are the modern makers' interpretations, their remarks about the original bow. In the back of the book, it talks, some aspects stood out slightly different to every maker. Where the facets were slightly spiraled, or and just looking at their interpretation, some new modern bows, some copies that look old. But anyway, it just so it's not specific to this particular bow or this book, but just tort in general. I find that very fascinating from different perspectives.
I agree with you. Do other people know about this book very well? And you can hold up yours, Josh. Do you guys know this book? So in 2010 or so, I don't remember when, Paul Childs did an exhibition of tort bows in London. Here we go, 2008. And he collected perhaps 25 bows. I'm not quite sure. Josh, maybe you could look that up while I'm doing it. This is a really good book. As bow books go, it's relatively inexpensive. It's $90 or $100. I don't remember. And it's just, it's the typical mug shots. It's a Paul Childs book, which is to say the photography looks like every other Paul Childs book. I'm not knocking it. It's just his way of photographing is very consistent through all his books. I think, it's really good. It's got a number of really good books. And then over the years, Paul had found this very late tort that he had commissioned copies from, I don't know how many makers, 15, And a number at the end of the book, he asks each maker to say a little bit about the copying process or copying. And some of them like Jean-Pascal Nair, what he did was he did a poem about tort and copying tort. But others got very specific about every time I see a tort, here's something I find fascinating. So if I'm going to go somewhere and I know that there's going to be 3 or 4 torts there, or even one, I often take this book on the plane and reread all those sections to be thinking, I should be looking at that. Here's a really cool place in a tort that I refresh my memory of. These are some cool details that these really good makers think is worth seeing.
And this book, or this bow, is actually on page 185 in the Millant book.
Oh, great! Thanks.
So that's the bow that got copied.
And And I was looking at that bow last night. If you compare the picture of it in the Millant book versus the one in this book, the Millant book, the how rustic the frog throat is doesn't come out. It's really jagged. It's I don't think they've changed the photo at all, but it's the original. He's old at that point, 1823. He's 75. You know, so yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. This is a really good book to add into your collection for $100. Anyone else in the torts? My last one in this volume was just going to the Schwartz section, just because I think Schwartz is a really cool maker that people don't really hear much about. And I was looking at number 3, which is on page 329, which is just again, it's a cello bow with a violin bow head. I wish I would have known more about bows. A guy I worked with for a long time owns this bow, and if I would have had the knowledge then, I would have probably just had this bow for years. It's such a cool looking bow, really there. But so if you get a chance to see Schwartz, they're fantastic. I really recommend it.
Can you say something about why, like the violin head on a cello bow, like why, why or why not?
Why or why not? I've made a couple. I really enjoy it. I had been loaned one of those torts at one point, so I made a couple. I think they look cool. I think the way that the head comes and is a 90-degree angle versus being swept back like on a normal cello, I think that gives different playing characteristics to a cello bow. I think it allows the bow to be more supple going all the way up to the head, which I think can be a really good thing to shoot for. And it depends on what your wood is and how you're going to use that wood. I think some wood can work really well with that. So that's my thoughts on that. And I think it looks cool, but you know, which should be a secondary consideration in a lot of ways, you know, but so that's a great question. Anyone else? Shall we go to volume 2? What did I? One of the things about these books is that they're roughly kind of chronological. The first book sort of takes you up to right around, let's call it 1800, 1825. Book 2 is sort of the 1800s. Book 3 is the 1900s. It's not meant to be that way. It's just sort of the way the dividers on the pages came out. But as we get into volume 2, the first one that pops up to me is Peugeot. The one I have decided to look at is on page 19. Is that right? That doesn't look right. Oh, page 32, bow 19. Are we all set? One of the things that's really interesting to me about this bow, it's one of the few bows that's in both the Millant book and in the Vattelot books. And before the Millant book came out, I spent a lot of time staring at the Vattelot book. And there's a couple other bows that I've noticed that are in both, but that's just a really great example of a Peugeot in so many ways. Great wood. One thing to notice, the Petit Talon, the small heel plate, is often wider than it is long on a Peugeot. He's one of the few makers that do that. If you look over on the bow to the right on page 21 or bow 21, which is my other great looking bow in the Pajot situation. The bit detail on is shorter than it's wider than it is long. Eric, here, I'll hold that up for you. And he's one of the few makers who did that. There's two different ways to sort of set up head composition. I'm going to try to see if I can do my share a screen here. I don't know. Assistant.
Yes.
Why isn't this letting me change things?
Show you. I got it.
You got it there. You know, in an awful lot of bow composition, you can set. I know I've explained this to some people. You can set up your bow. This is kind of your classic bell-shaped head, and if you set up how the bottom of your plate lines up with the line of the stick, and then make these two lines fairly, I've forgotten my geometry. If that's not equilateral, but if you set this up as a triangle where all the angles sort of meet, that's a really, if you do that, that's a way to make a bow that's you're 60% of the way of having a good looking bow if you set up your composition in that way. It's like if you play guitar, if you play electric guitar, if you have really good tone, you're 60% of the way there as well, a lot of people say. But the way that Pajot sets up his composition is rather than having that, he sets up his composition in terms of a parallelogram, which is another way to do it that as you're sort of thinking, oh, what do I want to do as I'm making a bow, or for that matter, just looking at bows, if you'll find that 9 times out of 10, maybe even 19 out of 20, your violin bows are going to fall into one of these two rules. Almost all of them actually fit into the equilateral triangle. It's not equilateral. Paul, what is that?
Symmetrical.
Symmetrical, kind of. There's another term. What?
What's the issue?
I got this. What's a triangle where the angles are the same?
Isosceles?
Isosceles? Not really. Anyway, so when you're looking at the Pajots, they're almost always set up in this form of a parallelogram. And you'll find that in other bows as well. And in your own making, if you set it up in one or the other, like I say, you're really going along the ways of setting it up that way. I don't want to say it's hard to screw it up back after that, but it really sets you up to be making a good bow by thinking about that as you're thinking about your own composition. And then also as you're looking at bows, you don't want to get too into the idea of this is the rule, it has to follow rule 1 or rule 2, or you're going to miss some really beautiful bows that don't fit into that. But many bows do fit into those two.
In French is a triangle isocèle.
Isosceles?
Yeah, it's a isocèle.
Yeah.
Triangle. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Now, Matt,
Yeah.
what I find interesting, at least I feel like as far as the latest fashion of bows coming out of France right now is more of this Pajot parallelogram style.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the bows that were awarded at the VSA were of that style. Do you have any thoughts on that?
There were a number of people working starting in about 2000, 2002 who developed that. And a lot of their followers have seen that as a successful competition strategy and used it. So things go in trends, and for the moment, if you want to win a competition and you don't necessarily have a new idea, you can do that. Or a lot of them have worked with, basically it flows out of the work that Yannick Le Canu did from 2000. I don't remember when Yannick first won. I think 2000 to 2006. Yannick and I were both working in a style like that, and Yannick had a lot more people following. You know, Yannick taught Eric Fournier and Emile Bejon, not Emile, Emmanuel Bejon. Those two guys were looking at my work as well. Sorry, it sounds really, oh, I'm so important, but I know they were. And then all those guys have trained people who have done that. And at the moment, that is the style that's going there. That has been. I don't know how long that's going to last, but we'll see. Florian, did you have something to ask?
Yes, Matt, you described the angles of the head. Do you have anything to say, because I find your style of explaining these geometrical forms, do you have a way about thinking of the angle of the head plate in relating to this?
Damn it, Florian, I was going to do a drawing on that and I didn't. So I'll try to explain it like this. Or, crap, there's not a bow here. What? He might have a solution.
No, I don't online you, never mind.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Here's how Morgan Anderson looks at it. Actually, Paul?
Yeah?
Can you go down and grab me a bow?
You can,
Any bow?
Yeah, there's a gold cello bow probably on the, that I just reheared, if you can find it. But
you can also do the share screen and the whiteboard to draw.
I think that's what my son might have been trying to do. When he gets back up, we'll see if we can do it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So as you look at the bow, and you've got the, let's pretend the head's over here. Any bow will do it, Paul. Let's say the head's coming down here. You got the line of the bow, and you got the line of the head plate. You would like the two lines to meet at about here. You know, you want to, if they meet too close, then the angle of the head plate's up too high. If they meet too far away or don't meet, then it looks like it's drooping down. The drooping down you'll see in a lot of German examples, nothing personal for you. You know, it doesn't quite work. And then,
This guy?
yeah, great, excellent, thanks. That's a viola bow, but anyway.
You've seen one, you've seen them all.
Yeah. I don't know if this, you know, if we take the line of this and it's kind of going like that, and then the line of the head plate, it's kind of coming up a little bit more, and they're meeting about 8 inches or a foot out there. If it's too close, it's angled up too far. If it's too far out there, it's too far out there. So that's a general rule on how that's going to work out. Go ahead, Florian. Yeah.
So if you look at the bows on 32 and 33, the Peugeot bows, the one has got a really steep angle upwards, and the other is more parallel. So you have an opinion that the one that goes up is looking not as nice than the other one. Is that correct?
Could you tell me which bows those were again? I didn't catch it.
They were the Peugeot bows on page 32 and 33.
Uh-huh.
So I think the one on 33, if I'm correct, I've got to look.
You know, if we were going to apply the rule that I just said, then you might look at the bow number 19 on page 32.
Yes, yeah.
And think that the angle of the head plate was maybe a little bit too upward.
Yes.
And that's a great example of, look, Matt doesn't know what he's talking about to some extent. Or really what it's saying is, that's still a great looking, beautiful bow, you know? So this is kind of an idea. It's sort of a rule that's in my brain to some point, but that doesn't mean that it can't go against that rule and still be a beautiful bow. So
you don't have an opinion that the more forward angle this parallel is, oh sorry, my hands are like, the more forward maybe it should lift more up, or so that.
I could see where you might. I would go the opposite way myself. One of the things I think, and someone I worked with George Teffo, I think I had a bow like that, and he said, "Oh, it looks like the guy's gonna fall backwards, is how he described it. And that gave me an image of, oh, I want to make sure I'm not, that's something I think about. So for me, that would not be a way that I would think about it, but that's not to say that other people can't.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else see any cool Peugeot boats to be thinking about?
I think the number 15 on the page 30, that is more of a parallel tip plate to the angle of the stick.
Mm-hmm.
More or less like Grande Dame, you know, with the taller heads, and it's a nicer look for a tall head to have, you know, a little bit less angle. I mean, it's still pleasant, I think.
Yeah, that's a good example. And that does look a lot like a Grande Dame, and Grande Dame is the other maker who used that compositional style a lot. So I'm ready to jump up to talk about Simone. Is that a good place to go for people? That goes to page 187. The organization of these books is by the maker's, the year of his birth. So I really like that in a lot of ways. And one thing, it almost still surprises me, because you always think of like the middle period bows, Picot school bows. You think, okay, Picot, Simone, Henri. So it's interesting to me, every time I look at the book, they're like, no, Simone is actually before. They're contemporaries, but he's born before Picot. What I wanted to talk about the Simone stuff is I really love the Simone bows that have this big swooping back of the head. Like I've said, bow 12 and 13 on page 187. And these are bows from after Voron has started, and this is sort of showing the influence of Voron. Even more so the cello bow number 15 or 14. What we're seeing is once Voron takes over with the non-sharp angle heads, even really established makers like Simone are following suit. I don't know if they had to follow suit. It could be that they had to follow suit. It could be that, again, what drives bow making is being able to make a living. And if that's what everyone was saying, you know, evidently the Voron model took everything by storm, where everyone had to switch over at that point. But I love those ones that have the big, but I like big swoopy stuff. So that's are there any bows in the middle there that we might have missed that people wanted to talk about in makers between Simone and Peugeot? I'm about to pop into Picot. The only Picot bow, I mean, Picot's great. Who's to argue? The only one that I pointed out was that kind of oddball one called the Millanoro. And that one, you know, that it's got the almost cello composition to it. This and the back of the head are the it doesn't have chamfers. It has a single chamfer that meets in the back. Eric, if you want to have a look at that.
What page is that, Matt?
220, bow 21. So it's not really a typical Picot in many ways. It's a really cool bow. It's great in person. I don't remember what the inscription says in that dot.
Wow. Yeah, that's striking.
Any other Picot thoughts, people?
I wanted to bring up one bow. I mean, one maker.
Great.
Previous to Picot, that has a very interesting stylistic head, where the front of it is a little bit, you know, is the reverse of the back, basically, slightly, which is Fonclaws. You know, make fantastic bows. You know, anybody that has played a Fonclaws, you know, had. You know.
Vito, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you say that again a little louder? I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
Yes, the maker that I was trying to mention is Fonclaws.
Great.
Yeah, the style of the head, it's like the front normally is a tall head, but you know, it has a curve up opposite to the back normally. You know, you don't see many of these nowadays, but usually
So,
have a pretty even swoop on the front.
so Fonclaws starts on page 109. Let's all. And if you go to like bow 5s, well, bow 3 is an extreme example of that.
Yes.
Bow 5 is maybe more typical of a Fonclaws. How, like Vita was saying, if this is the beak of the bow, as it comes up, rather than coming back a little like that, it kind of comes up and comes back that way. Personally, I don't like that, but it's also an interesting thing. Here you go, Eric. If you want to, that bow on the upper page on the right. Personally, I don't like that. Although it's interesting whenever, a lot of times if you go into shops, people sort of try to stump you. Oh, look at this, tell me what it is, which is really annoying because they know so much more than you and you feel like you're going to look like an idiot. And quite often they will show you a Fonclaws. So it's a good one to think, oh, I can do this. And now I've impressed somebody, and then they start pulling out more bows. But
I try to avoid that too, you know.
Me too.
Yeah. The next one I wanted to look at is a bow that's really similar to that Picot one. It's on page 238. Right. That's LaFleur. LaFleur is really interesting. Kind of an amateur maker, maybe. I think I've got that right. But that bow number 8 looks an awful lot like the Picot one I showed up and showed. It's got the chamfers meet in the middle there. You guys should talk about something. I need to do something for just a moment. It started to really rain here. I want to go close a couple windows in my house. Okay, I'll be just a moment. The back window is open.
Does anyone know if there's a specific name for a bow that has those 2 chamfers in the back of the head instead of the regular chamfers? No.
I'm trying to do one right now.
Okay, nice.
Oh, okay.
Just more so as.
Thank you. Sorry.
For fun.
That's cool.
Matt, Janelle asked a question if there was a specific name for a bow, the head style where the chamfers meet in the back, like that LaFleur we just looked at. You've made, I think I saw one you made like that out of Alternate Woods a few years ago. Is that correct?
I saw you saw it where?
I think it was at a Federation meeting in DC where out of Alternate Woods. That was years ago. What is there a name for that style?
I don't know of a name. There is a name and I can't think of it.
I think Ulf was going to mention something.
I just want to mention that this kind of back of head you can also see on cello bows from earlier period, maybe 1750, 1780 somewhere. Just a comment I would like to add.
Yeah. Josh, that bow of mine that you mentioned, somewhere in my notes I have a bow that I hope we'll get to. I think every maker has got some bizarre ideas that have to come out on a bow. And that bow, I took every bizarre idea I had and I put it into that one bow to get everything out of me. And I can't remember what maker I saw him yesterday. I thought, this is his bizarre bow. And I highly encourage people to make that one bow and put it in a box. Josh, when you were working with Benoit had a bow like that he made.
Yeah.
That was a pretty weird bow. And
I think I made several of them.
and Georges Steffel made an octagonal bow where the top facet ended up, by the time it was at the head, it was the 45-degree facet. And he said it was really hard to do, and you couldn't tell that he had done that. It just looked like he didn't know how to make a straight bow. It just looked so bizarre. He said, if you're going to do that, you want to take the top one and make it be the side one, then people would probably understand what you're doing. So I think everyone's got that bow, and everyone should make that bow. I don't even know what time it is. How are we doing here? Oh my gosh. All right. Then I'm gonna start skipping some things here. I'm gonna skip the Godet. Let's go to Grand Dame, which is I went to the page 301. And Vito had mentioned Grand Dame earlier when he was talking about the Fonclaws. Very tall heads. What I want to talk about, those two bows on page 301, is the top one is a violin bow. There you go, Eric. And the bottom bow is a cello bow. And again, we're in that sort of parallelogram style of composition. Noel Burke was one of the first people to really get influenced by Grand Dame. And I remember a competition that Noel Burke won. Well, I remember one of the makers said, I can't believe how well he had taken the design of one and just made it be such a good job of a violin bow, cello bow, just the consistency of design through them. You could really tell it was the same idea going on. And that bow number 1 and bow number 2 in the Grand Dame show how you can do that. It's a really difficult thing to do, to try and have a consistent thing going on through yourself. Oh, here we go. If we go to bow 18 on page 309, is that the bow in that? Oh, what I wanted to show there is how, if you look at how rounded off that is, they're saying that's by 1865. So again, there's another really established maker that in order to, there you go, in order to make a living, or for whatever reason, everyone was following Voron. I don't know that those makers were thinking, oh, this is a great idea. They very much might have been thinking, this is how I'm going to keep the family fed. And I don't in any way mean that in a negative thing about them. These are tradesmen. They're doing what the market calls for. I'm all ready to go to Voron. Does anyone else want to pop in any bows in roughly this era that they're really excited about? Okay. So I'm going up to page 373. So in roughly 1860, 1855, Voron leaves working for the Villon shop, and he very quickly changes what he's doing and revolutionizes the bow. The heads become much lighter. By lighter, I mean visually lighter, a little bit shorter. One of the things I'm really interested in right now is that I think that's when where the stick mortise is placed, that's when that changed from being, it went from being very close to the end of the stick to being another 4 millimeters closer to the head. I don't know why. The stick got a little bit longer, but the plane length didn't necessarily get longer. I don't know what his ideas were around that. I'm trying to figure out what his ideas were around that, because he's obviously someone who thought about everything. And he's working for Villon, and so the clientele in the Villon shop would have been pretty well off bourgeois people. I'm wondering to what extent what's going on in the art world may have had something to do with what he was thinking visually. There's a whole bunch of possibilities there. Or he may have been someone who wasn't interested in that sort of thing at all. Like I understood. The bow on page 373 on number 7 is a fantastic bow, the top one. For me, the bow below it, which is a viola bow, is a little bit clumsy, the head. And I see this, personally, I've seen this in a lot of Voron and a lot of Lemi's work. It's hard to find a bow where the head, the frog, and the button are great. You often say, oh, look, here's a really great frog, and here's a great button. And then you get to the head and you think, not as great. You know, maybe good, maybe not good. And so it's great when you can find a really good one where all 3 components work really well. Hey, Janelle.
I just had a question about, like, you said the head is clumsy, and as I'm trying to develop my eye to see what you're seeing, I'm just curious if you could point out the ways that it's clumsy to you.
Sure. Let's start at the crown of the head. Take your eyeball at the crown of the head, and then move your eyeball to the left, and then down that curve. And about a third of the way down the curve, to me, there's almost a little bit of a kink in it. And it progresses out to the left in a curve that is not exactly the same as the curve he came down with. Can you see that?
Yes.
So to me, that doesn't quite work. You know, to me, either if the top curve had been a little bit bigger, or if the bottom curve had been a little bit more scooped, those would have flowed together better. And if you look really, really close on the top bow, you can maybe see that sort of a similar thing, but not nearly as much.
Right.
So to me, that works better.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Here's a question. I mean, you said, you know, you might find one with a terrific frog or a terrific button or a terrific head, but not common. Do you find them all together? Why is that, do you think?
Because these guys were making really fast, and they didn't care about that. You know, Voron's working there, and Lemi's sitting next to him, and they're both making Voron bows. And there's another maker that I just read yesterday that surprised me was working for maybe Prosper Collis or some. No, it's Husson. And they're just cranking out stuff, and each of them, they're probably by the end of the week, they've each made 5 bows. And so little things like this, when I say made 5 bows, probably a box of frogs is showing up made by somebody else. The buttons are coming at least where they're filing the octagon, maybe not. They're buying frogs 80% finished, probably. I'm not sure about that with Voron, but certainly in Sartori's case, that's what's going on. And so little details like that are, plus they're so incredibly talented that they can make a bow, a stick, and make the frog fit and make the whole thing work in a day. The little things like that don't, you know, in the long run, particularly at that time, didn't matter. Did that answer pretty well? That's a great question. Janelle, you had a great question as well.
So how that translates, I know we're studying the books, but how that translates to today, I think a lot of players, shops, and even other bow makers expect a high level of refinement. You know, so I don't think we can't pop out bows that fast where everything is as meticulous. Correct?
I'm sorry, you cut out for me just a little bit. Could you rephrase the question? I didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, so it's more like, you know, because people want to see a higher level of refinement. It's nearly impossible to create as many bows as they did and still meet what the market wants. The market wants perfection.
I'm sorry, everyone has frozen up on me. Okay, now you're back. Okay. I think I got the gist of the question. People are expecting every bow to be a competition quality bow. It's a real drag in some ways. It's a real challenge in some ways. I don't know anyone work, well, I only know a couple people who could work at that speed today. You know, I can imagine a couple people, if the frogs were largely given to them, they could crank out a pretty good bow 5 in a week. They'd be burned out pretty bad. But it's just, you know, we're also looking at, you think of how, and these are the people who rose to the top of that challenge, who could do it. So, I'm sorry, did that answer the question?
Yeah. You addressed the topic. Yeah.
So, it's a different world, you know, than it was then. And even when you see those, to get 2 out of 3 things on the bow really good, that's way better than I can do, making one of these. A bow I wanted to show as well is on page 375, number 11. Is it? Do I got it right? Where we're calling that an inspiration tort. Did most people get the? I sent email around with a picture from a different book. Did you guys get that? Shoot, no. The people who were signed up for the class, I sent out a picture. Josh, you would like this book. Josh, do you have that book?
What is it?
The Lone Expedition Stringed Instruments and Bows.
Yes.
Florian, you got that email, didn't you?
We could share that image, right, on our screen?
Yeah.
Okay, I think, are you talking about the one you sent out, the exhibition where there's the Sartori that's made after the?
Right.
Oh, no, you're talking about something.
No, that's what I wanted to talk about.
There.
I think it's really interesting when you see bows that established makers have done a copy of some sort or another. So in the Sartori section of the Millant book, this bow that a copy that he has made. Oh, cool.
What page?
Yeah, good going.
This is from the document that Matt had sent us. I just shared my screen, and so I pulled this up. Can you guys see okay?
Great, thanks for doing that, Tony. The top bow there, and again, this is out of this book here, is a Sartori interpretation of a tort. The bow below it is the bow that he was copying. Tony, can you also show that second one, the frogs? Or can you show the page 2? That's the frogs, yeah. And so you can see that a lot of the things he did quite well. Like if you look at how the throat comes down and goes a little bit deeper than the line in the ferrule. The Sartori one, the back curve is a little tighter. But I just find the bows like this really, really interesting to see. The one I was talking about in the Millant book is where Voron has tried to do an interpretation of a tort. Whenever you can see one of those in person, it's really interesting, and you can almost always, you can tell what they're trying to do, but you can actually also tell it's that person. Some of their mannerisms they're just not able to do to get rid of. Oh, that's a great thing to look at. You guys can see those two on that bottom violin bow. We're looking at the frogs right now. This is something I wanted to bring up. You can see on the reproduction how, first of all, the thumb projection is much sharper, probably because the original, someone would have filed it off. But can you also see how the Parisian eye, the rings on the reproduction are too thick? They're, a lot of people do this in trying to do a tort. It's generally assumed that the tort ring is 1 millimeter wide, and it's not. So people tend to make a ring that is 1 millimeter wide, and by the time you've kind of hammered it in place and filed it and everything, it ends up being about 1.1. And so that's a thing from Paul Seafried is all 0.9, maybe even 0.8. And by the time you finish it, it'll look big enough. But if you start out at 1.0, it ends up looking too big. And that's a really good example of I'm sure that's what it does. The frog is at a guess by Henrik Kosten. But all right, thanks, Tony. That was good to have in there. Were there any questions on that? All right. My Zoom is running really slow here. So if I miss someone raising their hand or something, Tony, please pop in and make sure everyone gets to be heard.
We are nearing our time. It is one.
Okay.
We've got a few minutes. If you want to share some anything, any other those, or topics you want to cover before we end.
Let me pop into. Yeah, if we went to the Lamy section, I don't know. Let's just look at on page 511. Oh, yeah. Boy, that cello bow for the Lamy, that's a great bow. Number 14. If we went back to thinking about maybe the thumb projection's a little heavy on that one. I don't know. What do you think? Oh.
Too small.
What's that?
Too small. It's a little bit on the strong side, but I like it. Really nice.
The Lamy section has one of my favorite. There are little jokes in the text here and there, and it has one of my favorite little jokes in the text in the Lamy section, where he's talking about how as he was starting out, when he left Voron, or when Voron died, Lamy, during this period, Lamy Père also made some bows mounted in nickel silver, bow 1, as well as a few base bows. This leads us to believe that despite his clients, he only had a few clients despite his talents, he only had a few clients in his early years, which is to say things were so bad, he even made base bows at that point. And I do think that's a little bit of a joke. And you can find the little ones here and there. Shall we, in volume 3. Can we all grab volume 3? I am completely frozen up. I can only see me. Are the rest of us here still?
Yes, we can hear you, and occasionally you freeze, but we can still hear you pretty clearly.
Okay, good. Volume 2 ended up with Vigneron, who died in 1905, so right about at that 1900 break. If we go to the Thomason section, page 75, and this is going to kind of get to what Florian said a little bit. I just want to show that bow number 2, that cello bow, with the curved ivory, the curved face. Just to say, every now and then I see someone whose their wild idea is, I'm going to do a curved face on a cello bow. And even Thomason couldn't pull it off. Don't do that. It's an unfortunate thing. I think part of that was he may have been influenced by some of the people in the Vilm shop who were coming over from Germany. But also in Thomason, I want to show bow 9, which is on page 79. That is my favorite frog of all time. That is to me the best frog. I love that frog. we'll keep it going. Any questions? Thomason's a great maker. Anytime you can see a Thomason, spend time with it. Any questions in that sort of an area? Anyone have any other bows? I was going to jump up to Sartori. Anyone else have any bows they'd like to be thinking about in this era? The fatigues are great. Either of them, and you know, it's all. I also find it really interesting that you'll, at the end of each section, there's sort of Bernard Millant's editorialization of what he really thinks of the maker. Most of the entry is facts, but then you know, your last paragraph is often a little something there that's a little bit more. The ending paragraph for Jules Fatigue is Jules Fatigue is, without any doubt, together with Eugene Sartori, one of the greatest Parisian makers of the first half of the 20th century. And so, you know, when we see a Fatigue, I think a lot of times we think, oh, well, it's not a Lamy, it's not a Sartori, you know, it's kind of like another guy. No, those Fatigues are great. And I think reading those last little paragraphs can tell you. And he doesn't like to say anything bad about anyone, so sometimes they're a little hidden. There'll be things like, these are well sought out by collectors, whereas another one might say, these are well sought out by collectors and players. And you get the feeling that he might have a bit higher feeling for those. The Sartori is in, what are we looking at, page 112? Or so? Is that where we get to Sartori? Yeah. Tony, you were asking about you know, what shops and players are expecting right now in terms of level of finish. A real reason for the rise of Sartori in the last 50 years is how consistent everything is. And maybe a little overly consistent in terms of model, but really consistent in terms of quality, in terms of playability. You know, when people say, oh, I'm going to bring in a bow for a reader, I'm going to bring in my Sartori, I always think, oh, great. You know, I mean, it'll be nice to see, but, you know, after you've seen 50 Sartoris, they're really pretty similar typically. Whereas like if they say, I'm going to bring in my Pajot, you think, well, this is going to be a bow that's going to be consistent within this maker's work, but you never know what's coming in the door when a Pajot is coming. And that's, I would rather be a maker of sort of like that, where you know the quality of the work is going to be great, but maybe there's going to be some fluctuation here and there. The Sartoris, so when you look at the Sartori, I mean, they look really, really similar. You know, people who are experts can say, oh, this is obviously 1905 to 1910, and this one's 1935 to 1940. You can pick up those things, but for me, I'm not able to do that as much. But he's such a great maker, he has to be mentioned. My favorite picture is the picture of him and his family. Shoot, where is it? Page 123, where you have Eugene and one time I was paging through the books with Paul Steve Reed over the phone. We were much like this, you know, oh, look at this, because maybe I had a question about expertise or something. He looked at that picture and goes, oh, there's Sartori and Madame Shrek. We can pop up.
He also dedicated, you know, he also made bows that were, you know, inscribed to his daughters and his wife.
So one of those bows is in that book.
Yeah. I think he did before he went off to World War I or something, I think, right?
That's right. He made a quartet. And they're all inscribed to the two daughters, to his wife. I don't know who the fourth one's for.
It's not subscribed. It's not inscribed.
Oh, okay.
It's not on dedication.
Is it a quartet, as in 2 violins, viola, cello, or just 4 violin bows? Do you know?
Well, I think it's 4 violin bows, or maybe 3 and 1 viola.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really cool that you did that. Let's just look really quick in the Ushar section. Maybe we'll finish up there. Ushar is at page 395. Again, really consistent. I love the Ushar bows that are after he has left his father's workshop, and before, maybe even before he goes to Paris, but certainly before he goes to New York. Once he goes to New York, they're too stiff. Which is, again, how am I good? This is what people are telling me they want. I will make a bow that, I don't know that Ushar had this personal vision of bows should be stiffer. I think the people were saying, this is what I want. And this is how, he was, when I say struggling, he was establishing a new business in a country where he was a foreigner and was trying to meet people and please people who are going to be important. There's a great line about him in the book. I can't find it. Oh, he tells the story here of when I'm busy. He tells the story of when Emile Huchard, E.A. Huchard bought out his father, E.F. Huchard. And then on Monday morning, E.F. Huchard came there and acted like nothing had happened. Like E.F. Huchard was still the boss of the thing. And so the Huchard section is really good and tells these, actual stories about people. And to me, it's really interesting, the stories of who people are. Do any of you guys have the new Sartori book that came out of France in the last 6 months? Yeah, there you go. Eric's got it. That's a fantastic book. Eric, could you just open to a random page in that? It's all about, there's the house that he had outside of Paris where he did mainly roughing work. It was on a river and it would flood, so he would make sure that the wood was never on the bottom floor. It's got a whole bunch of letters. It's got pictures of his tools. There's only maybe pictures of 6 bows in the entire thing. And it's fantastic. It's written by his grandson, who's in his 80s now. And that's a fantastic book. Again, it's $90 or something. And to me, the stories of who these people were are just as important as pictures of their bows. I really like the section on Bernard Huchard. It's written with a lot of love. It's really interesting. The only bows we see by Bernard Huchard in the States here are the Vidu Days ones. He has pictures of the ones that Bernard was making while he was teaching in Mirecourt, and that gives you a glimpse into what he was teaching in Mirecourt. He was only really teaching how to make a classic rounded 1920s style bow. He wasn't teaching, here's how you make a picade. What Huchard felt was it's harder to make a bow in this style, in the style of Voiron, with the rounded thing. So if he taught them how to make a bow in this style, they would have all the tools, meaning, all the skills needed to then make a picade style bow. So during that time, none of the instruction was in a picade style bow, as I understand it. I have that from Benoit and George Defo. But I like in the book, like bow number 5 and 6, show 5, 6, and 7. Well, 7's kind of an anomaly. That's a very picade style cello bow. But you get away from what the Vidu Days things were, and they're also more supple. It's a different clientele. He's more making for what he wants to make, and he's making these bows to demonstrate to the students, here's how you make a bow. I find that a really interesting section in order to get an insight to where bow making came, because certainly in France, almost all bow making flows out of have people who work with Huchard, and quite that really, I don't know if that's true worldwide, but Pretty true. So that's kind of hanging out. Does anyone else have any other bows to be thinking about here?